Remember when the box office was filled with uproarious comedy? Yeah, now the box office is so disappointing we laugh so we don't cry. Hi y'all, SnarkyJay cosplay here. If we take a look at the box office, during the 90s and 2000s, we were treated to all manner of awesome comedy movies that we still love to reference and rewatch to this day. But it feels like for the past 15 or so years, the comedy genre has taken an enormous nosedive. And I've been sitting here wondering why. We all love to laugh, so it's kind of weird that we're no longer getting movies like The Anchorman or Dodgeball or Step Brothers or Tropic Thunder. Tropic Thunder for a number of different reasons we'll get into later. But today, in this video, what I want to figure out is who killed the comedy movie and can we bring it back? Before we figure out how comedy fell so far, we have to figure out where we were at in its peak. And in my opinion, I think the golden era of modern comedy was from about 1995 to 2010. We had star-driven, well-produced, mid-budget comedy movies with guys like Ben Stiller, Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson, Will Ferrell, and Jim Carrey absolutely dominating studios and the box office. The comedies of this era were basically mid-budget studio investments with wide theatrical releases, and most of these saw huge success and really big box office returns for the studios. In 2005, Wedding Crashers raked in a whopping $288 million on a mid-budget of around $40 million. Just a few years before that, Meet the Parents, starring Ben Stiller and Robert De Niro, brought in $330 million on a $55 million budget, and a record-breaking comedy when it came to the box office, The Hangover, which ended up spouting off an entire franchise, made a whopping $469 million at the box office. And not only did it rake in those $469 million, but for a long time it was the highest grossing R-rated movie to be released in theaters. It broke a record previously held by Beverly Hills Cop for over 25 years. And the thing about the comedies of this era was that they had a uniqueness in cultural ubiquity. They had catchphrases and lines and references and all sorts of things that were just kind of adapted into pop culture. People just knew these things. To this day, a lot of these comedies still hold up in tidbits in everyday conversation if you're talking to anybody that wasn't born in the TikTok generation anyway. Studios greenlit these mid-budget comedy projects because they had the legs to basically travel through pop culture for years and install themselves as culturally relevant comedies, and they also brought in pretty good money. The ROI was fantastic. And then in 2008, we basically hit the beginning of the end, or what I like to call the Marvelification of humor. The rise of the MCU from 2008 on basically introduced a new quippy type of humor that was kind of campy, one-liner filled stuff that felt better suited for TV, but eventually made its way into modern media in the theaters. We can probably thank Joss Whedon and every MCU project ever, but it basically became a stain on the tapestry of good comedic writing. And so the thing about Marvel installing that quippy sort of humor in all of their films basically ended up turning comedy not as a main event of a movie, rather something sprinkled into superhero action and sometimes even sci-fi movies. If we take a look at some films like Iron Man or Guardians of the Galaxy, there's that self-deprecating, quippy, one-liner humor that is sprinkled into a movie that otherwise is not a comedy. It just brings levity to something that is basically fantasy and action-driven. Most important to note, though, is that just like the MCU films, the comedy in these films is safe and incredibly meta. It's really hard to get offended by a joke made in an MCU film, probably because it's been focus grouped to hell and they're making sure they don't offend anybody and they can maximize box office returns. Compare that to the absurdity in a movie like Step Brothers or the non-PC themes in either one of the Ace Ventura movies, or probably one of our best worst examples of this, the absolute chaos in Tropic Thunder. You would be really hard pressed to find a single line or joke in that movie that you can make today and not immediately get canceled. And so if you really think about it, there's a tonal shift here. What we now have is quippy, self-aware banter basically folded into 4-quadrant films so that audience get laughs inside of action movies that they were already gonna watch, which greatly reduces demand for a theatrical comedy night. And so if your audience gets their chuckles from big event films that they have to see in theaters, mid-budget comedies become way harder to sell. See, big franchises like the MCU, like Star Wars, Jurassic World, Fast and Furious, they have all managed to squeeze mid-budget films completely out of theaters and out of the studio's minds. If we take a look at this study, from 1991 to 2010, we're not even talking about peak MCU time. The top 50 earning films of those years were basically dominated by sci-fi and fantasy, pretty much at the expense of comedy and drama. And since the mid-90s, action films have completely eclipsed the market shares of other genres. Comedy tends to trail way behind. And so the studios now prioritize those $150 million blockbuster over the mid-budget $40 million comedy because they don't want to risk any potential issues with their return on investment. Legacy sequels like Ghostbusters Afterlife and Top Gun Maverick, they work to steal attention away from new or otherwise standing comedic voices. But the absolute worst thing that could have happened to the comedy genre when it comes to films is streaming. The theatrical to streaming window has gotten shorter and shorter over the past years that we've had streaming in our lives, but it absolutely collapsed right after COVID. Post-pandemic, theatrical exclusivity basically compressed down to about 45 days. And Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers, they were leading the charge on this. It wasn't like we were seeing small studios and really low-budget movies collapse like that. No, it was the big studios, industry leaders that really shrunk down that window. PVOD, or premium video on demand, which would be paying to rent a specific movie, that window currently sits at an average of about 37 to 39 days after the film's opening in theaters, while SVOD, or subscription video on demand, which basically just means that it's going to hit whatever streaming service you're subscribed to, by 2024, that window fell to just under 100 days, which is the quickest we have ever seen major theater releases hit streaming. And the movie theaters are suffering. They are literally having lobbyists beg the studios to make that window bigger again and basically force people to go to the movie theaters. They want people to feel like if I don't see this right now, I'm going to have to wait months to see it, which is how the system worked for years. But at this point, the genie is already out of the bottle, and I don't think the studios want to go back to that system. Think about it this way. If a $12 to $22 movie ticket gets you in to see a film that you'll probably get to see in just a little bit over a month at home, then the first casualties are the nice-to-have films, which are gonna be your dramas and your comedy films. The VFX special event blockbusters, you're gonna pay to see just because of the spectacle of them and you want to see them in theaters, but nobody needs a big IMAX screen to watch a Wedding Crashers or Tropic Thunder. Those comedies often don't require big screen viewing the way an IMAX film like Oppenheimer or any MCU movie would benefit from. And so the studios learned to basically offload any comedy movie that does see the light of day to streaming services like Hulu, Netflix, Prime Video, you name it. So then these comedies lose their cultural relevance because they lose that shared experience thing. When people would sit in a theater and laugh at the same high points and then walk out and reference it to friends who'd seen it in theaters across the city. That shared laughter experience was part of the big thing that would amplify the success of these films during their peak era, and that's all but gone at this point. And you know what else is gone? The DVD afterlife, which was a really big part of these films earning money after they were out of the theaters. Mid-budget titles used to be able to recoup some cash in the old pipeline, which was basically theatrical, to DVD, to then premium cable. Streaming basically collapsed that tale entirely. Not only do we really not have people buying physical media anymore, but blockbusters and movie rental places are gone. So there really is no way for anybody to step out and help the studios recoup some money by renting the DVD once the film is out of theaters. That step doesn't exist anymore. And that less reliable backend basically means there's way less reasons for studios to greenlight those $30 to $60 million comedy films. On the other hand, in a less business economic sense, we also now live in a society that has reached new levels of cultural sensitivity and a willingness to be triggered and outraged by literally every thing you could possibly see. Tons of classic comedy hits, like any one of the Hangover films, or Tropic Thunder, or if you're like me, I've seen Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls a million times, and I've seen the first one like twice. And you let me know if either one of those films would stand a chance being made today. Call it progress if that's what you want, but at the end of the day, we're seeing basically encouraged censorship as a result of people being sensitive to a lot more shit. So studios, in hopes to avoid any potential controversy, they start self-censoring, and any and all humor, both in dedicated comedy films and in action comedies, they basically become way more bland, they don't take as many risks, and unfortunately, I think one of the big things with comedy is risk-taking. I'm not saying that shock value is the key to comedy, but sometimes some of the biggest laughs might come out of holy shit, I never thought about that, I can't believe they said that. And sometimes that's not always squeaky clean and really nice to everybody. And so like I said, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Some audiences are gonna basically defend this as progress and say, yeah, we shouldn't be laughing at you name it, but others have seen it as the death of edgy comedy. And that's probably why nobody's ever gonna make another movie with Robert Downey Jr. in blackface. And to be completely honest, I don't even know that appetites for that kind of comedy really exist anymore. Zach Galifianakis was recently asked if he would ever make another Hangover, and he brought up a great point that the only people that ever ask him for another Hangover film are actual people on press junkets and interviewers. He kind of put it really succinctly, but also brilliantly. He said, I don't think people care. And thinking about it, I don't know that that many people really do. Speaking fairly, there are still cases where comedy works, but I don't think the comedy works in the traditional sense. If we take a look at a film like Barbie in 2023, Barbie made over $1 billion and is comedic in a lot of senses, but it's also an event film. So the whole Barbie era thing, everybody was wearing pink. There were men wearing pink. I mean, it was pink everywhere. Barbie was tied into marketing with every thing you could imagine for months. It was also the Barbie versus Oppenheimer type thing. So I think that was way less $1 billion because it was so funny and everybody needed this comedy, and way more $1 billion just because it happened to be a big event film and everybody was talking about it. Even a film like Free Guy in 2021, which made a little over $330 million, yeah, that was a comedic film, but it was also sold and tied in very strongly with action and sci-fi themes to basically justify the film even being released. And comedy technically isn't dead. Stand-up specials and sketch comedy thrive on places like YouTube, and there's still lots of comedy to be found on streaming. So comedy technically didn't die, it just moved platforms because it doesn't have the legs or the ROI to basically go the distance as far as these big studios are concerned. And the fallout, even if some of us haven't really noticed, has actually been huge. We're seeing a lot of comedic actors either turn to drama or doing TV, looking at people like Steve Carell and Jonah Hill, for instance. A lot of comedy writers either move to streaming or late night. Even late night comedy shows are taking a huge hit lately. And the worst part about this whole thing is that younger audiences aren't experiencing, didn't experience, and will likely never experience a comedic theatrical boom, which means that they're gonna keep getting their humor from Instagram Reels, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts, in which case, God help us. And thinking on a note that grim, I have to ask myself, can comedy come back? I think comedy can come back, maybe not the way it was during that peak era, like I said, from about 95 to 2010, but I don't think we're entirely f***ed when it comes to getting in a laugh. I think the first thing that really needs to happen is that theatrical to streaming window needs to grow. People need to feel forced to wait months. FOMO, or the fear of missing out, is huge. So if we stretch that streaming window back out and we start making people wait months to get what everybody else is saying, then maybe we can start putting out comedy movies again that people will feel urged to go see in theaters. And that ties into making these feel like an event. You have to make the comedy feel like an event. Either do that by bringing in some real star power. People like Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson, Ben Stiller. Bring in all these guys into a dedicated comedy film and make it feel like an event, something they absolutely cannot miss while it's in theaters. There also needs to be a clear identity behind these comedy films. We need to bring in a healthy dose of edgier voices. I'm not saying offensive humor or non-PC voices, but just edgier. People a little more willing to take some risks. We need edgier voices, and we need some high concept hooks. We can't just say, like, this is Marvel comedy without the Marvel. No, we need real concepts, and therefore we need the studios to see these as promising things. They need to put effort in the marketing that makes the film feel like an event, and they also have to be willing to take those mid-budget risks. If they're willing to put out content that has these overblown, bloated budgets, I mean, look how much Disney spent on The Acolyte, and that show was a tremendous failure. I think every minute of The Acolyte cost about $650,000 to produce. If they can put in that kind of money to that, who says that Warner Brothers or Paramount or whoever can't put in a little bit of cash to release a mid-budget film and probably recoup a good amount of it in theaters? So realistically, there's hope for the comedy genre. It's not dead. Like I said, it's alive in other places, but in theaters, it's currently on life support. And we can basically thank corporate caution, franchises, and the absolute collapse of the streaming window for putting comedy in the hospital. But it's not dead. It's hanging in there. It's still there, and the only thing we need to really bring it back is for the studios to give us a reason to laugh together again. And that's all from me. I've been SnarkyJay. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. For more SnarkyJay, be sure to check me out on Instagram, and if you'd like to support me, this channel, and my content creation, do check out and consider subscribing to my Patreon for exclusive photoshoot sets and cosplay content. I'll add links to all of those in the description below. And let me know your favorite comedy movie from 95 to 2010 in the comments below.